Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. And it can sound as just I'm involved in many things, but most of my research for the last 10, 15 years is connected with ideology, power, and symbolic representation. And some subjects which I have to write about, like today's, are byproducts of my Spanish research, because Spanish literature is good for studying nostalgia and melancholia. It's the most melancholic and nostalgic literature in the world, maybe. They have just excellent culture. And then I found out that we have something like that. I commented today that my interest in Soviet nostalgia started when I was working with the film Legend Number 17. So it's a film about Valery Kharlamov and how the Soviet, contemporary Russian cultural industries use nostalgia with the Spanish flavor, to mobilize the masses and to prepare the war. Brief theoretical introduction. I'm not going to be very theoretical tonight because it's 6 o'clock, 6:20, but I have to provide you with some definitions. What is nostalgia and how I interpret this subject? So I'm going to talk about maybe 55 minutes, and then we will have 30 minutes for the discussion. I will appreciate very much your questions. So doesn't matter. As far as I understand, most of you speak Russian, some of you speak Ukrainian. If you speak Spanish, you are welcome. This is my fault. I'm sorry. I love Germany. I travel to Germany, but I don't speak. This is something. So we begin with this term nostalgia. It's a special word, which we know consists of two words, Greek words, nostos, and so on. That's a seeking for home. But I would like to start with the definition of nostalgia, which I took from the book, which was made by the State University of Tomsk in 2011. That means that Russians are very important and are very attentive to subjects. They wrote something like 500-page document with the research. Though for those who are interested, I recommend this book. It's interesting. So, and we can say that nostalgia is interpreted as emotional, psychological, and socially determined phenomenon. You see, this is important. Emotional, psychological, and socially determined phenomenon. My understanding is a little bit different. Or is quite different. As a form of historical memory, they present it as memory, which manifests itself in emotional, psychological, and cultural actualization of the past personal and social experience and its comparison to the present, is a case of idealization of the past, which the idealization helps cope with losses caused by changes. Very interesting definition, because it shows that the researchers who were working on this project, they were interested in what I term the post-Soviet trauma. They never use this term, but they're interested in learning more how people cope with this. Then they say this is historical memory. I just doubt that nostalgia is a historical memory. Then if you would like to come, please come in. And then I disagree that it's a socially determined phenomenon. I will try to be more, to be clear. So my definition. So in my opinion, nostalgia is a sort of post-memory, because nostalgia cannot produce any accurate picture of the past. I'm not going to go into the details how memory works, but I think that as nostalgia is a means of coping with trauma, that means some elements of our unpleasant memories are deleted yeah, we can deal with the cases of this amnesia, with controlled amnesia and other things. Just, I would say that in many cases, nostalgia is transmitted from generations to generations. I will speak about it in this presentation, but they, the previous generation, the older generations, they idealize the reality before. That means they produce not a very accurate picture. Yes, a post memory is the memory of something which we do not remember, which is, this is my definition in this case. Okay, then. In my opinion, yes, of course, we can think about the experience of the past, and it can be pleasant if it happened to us. But in many cases, and in our situation in Ukraine, we deal with culturally constructed idealized images and values which are related to the past of individuals in small and large communities. I mean that there are people who produce those images, and there are people who disseminate those images, and they find some rhetorical strategies, to make people believe in this. And of course, it is always used as a factor of identification. Of course, you can say we speak about different types of nostalgia. If we speak about personal nostalgia, our events in the past, this is something clear, and I'm not going to say anything against it, because our memory is with us. We cannot blame people for making their past reality better than it was in the reality. But I want you to think about something different. In my opinion, at a certain moment in the post-Soviet countries, cultural industries began to produce huge amounts of nostalgic imagery in terms of post-memory. And it was connected with our Soviet past. We will speak about it. Yeah. What is Soviet nostalgia? So again, I would say this type of nostalgia is restorative. If we use the definitions of Svetlana Boym, we look back. We want to bring our experience back, and we want to return to the best features of. If we speak about the Soviet nostalgia of the socialist regime, I use the word regime. I'm sorry, I never liked the Soviet Union, and it was sort of regime for me, But the best qualities which are praised today: solidarity, comradeship, patriotism, social justice, and other things. And people see only these features. They don't remember what is not good. Just they delete it, and they want to restore these values, and the main strategy which is used here is deleting the worst sides of the Soviet past. Like, for example, we're not going to speak about kommunalka, so we're going to speak about apartments which were given to workers for free. But then that in the Soviet times you knew, I personally knew how it happened, because there was a lot of corruption about it. But this element is omitted. And another strategy, yes, there were difficulties, but those difficulties are natural, and it's the price for making life better. So, and I would like you to take a look at some very popular, I would say, subjects, components of the Soviet nostalgia, and in my opinion, it's a very positive example of nostalgia, because it's not in reality restorative. It's just ironical representation of the past. Yes, I love it. And this, in my opinion, it's correct attitude. You know, this is, I love it because it was my past, but I know it can never return. So why do I think that it's just we can see a lot of irony? Because you see this a little bit gloomy light. You know, they're supposed to be happy, but they're not. You know, and this is Babushka. She's selling sunflower seeds, you know, and wonderful doggies are sleeping, you know, and it's a little bit, everything is a little bit exaggerated. Yeah, that's like cartoon image, yeah, and we have peace, but at the same time, it's not real. It's something. Another example is, for example, buying at our Soviet stores, you see. The person who made the picture knew the Soviet life very well. You see, for example, you can see the picture with the 3 bears, yeah, or the portrait of Mikhail Boyarsky. Actually, by using those realia, you can say approximately at what year we can see. Yeah, so Mikhail Boyarsky like this is like beginning of the 80s. And this is another important question. Yeah, what period of the Soviet Union are you nostalgic about? You know, the late Soviet Union or the period of Stalinism or something else? You know, and again, you can see a lot of things which are critical about the Soviet system, because not very much food, and the store is pretty clean, but it's not rich at all. Yeah, so it's and the people do not communicate at all. You see, this is they are like isolated. Or another example, our public transport. I think it's sarcastic a little bit because practically in the center you can see this gloomy babushka, yeah, and another older gentleman. They are all angry. They're not smiling. Yeah, that is one of the stereotypes about the Soviet system. No smiling people at all. By the way, in the previous pictures, the confirmation of this rule, yeah, you can see in another picture. So those two persons, a man and a woman, you know, they are happy, maybe because they are together, but there is a third one. And she is abandoned and she is not alone. And I would say it's life full of envy. Envy. You know, something is presented, is something which we recognize, but at the same time you can see a lot of critical elements. What is interesting about studying Soviet nostalgia in the contemporary Russia? This is the only slide when I speak about the contemporary Russia, because I don't know anything about the country at all. I was born in 1963. I left Murmansk when I was 18, and the rest of my life I have been in Ukraine. You know, and sometimes I visited St. Petersburg and Moscow, but I don't think that Moscow and St. Petersburg is Russia. This is our idea from the childhood. Because you say, I knew Ivanovo, I knew Khabarovsk, I knew other places, but it was before 1991. After that, it was a different world. But what makes the Soviet nostalgia efficient in this? I want to draw attention to this element because I think it's productive for researchers. Because in the contemporary Soviet nostalgia, you can find a lot of anti-Soviet elements. So what makes the whole strategy efficient? And I think maybe now the Soviet nostalgia in the contemporary, it's my hypothesis. So it's less obvious, but the Russian Empire nostalgia, the empire about the Russian Empire, which people didn't know at all, is becoming more and more important. You can see Bolshevik values and anti-Bolshevik values, the White Guard and the Red Army, the Communist and Orthodox Church, which I never understood, you see. So everything in one package, I would say, I cite here the researcher whose name is Durenko, who says there are new words in the Russian national anthem, which is an example of using the anti-Soviet nostalgia in the Soviet discourse. But the music is Soviet. Real старые песни о главном. The same has occurred with the flag. The state flag is St. Andrew's banner, while the military uses the Soviet flag. A real Kamar and Melamid image. The city was renamed Volgograd, but the eternal flame under the Kremlin wall burns for a city called Stalingrad. And the best example, St. Petersburg of Leningradskaya Oblast. It works. And so that means the Soviet nostalgia is combined with the imperial one. So I would like to show you very briefly an example how the Soviet nostalgia is used in the advertisement of beer, Sibirskaya Korona. 2014. So I think the war already started, but it's in the same, I think it's the type of product which was used to disseminate the Soviet nostalgia. So, David Duchovny, a very famous actor. So you could see all most popular elements of the Soviet nostalgia. Very interesting advertisement. I don't have time to analyze it in details, but you can see they use music, they use messages, and of course not for Americans. It's for us, for the post-Soviet people who can recognize everything, and just you can work with this advertisement. For example, the posters of the films, he stops in front of the person, Peter the First. He wants, and his name, Duchovny, spiritual. You see, so Russia can produce, but the main idea, all Soviet is Russian. Generational factor. Of course, we have to take into account this factor, and the idea is that the more theoretically, the more person lived under the Soviet times, the more the person is inclined to be in the nostalgic mood about the Soviet past. But today, we have a very interesting phenomenon. There are many young people who have nostalgia about the Soviet Union. Those who are 19, 20, 21. And we should take this factor into the consideration every time. So, and nostalgia is used in the nation building not only in Ukraine, it is used in all countries of the post-Soviet world. If you speak about, for example, Russia, I think this Soviet memory, which is associated with the Soviet nostalgia, became the core on new imperialist myth. In other countries like Ukraine or Armenia or Azerbaijan or whatever, they also have their own groups of people who have the nostalgia. And what was interesting in the book, which was published in 2011 by the Tomsk University, yeah, I found a paper which recommended to use the Soviet nostalgia in order to restore the former Soviet Union, the new Soviet Empire. So one of the authors gave a recommendation to use it. Okay, guys, go ahead, look at what was going on, and use it. And some examples, yeah, or not some examples, I told about it already. And I ask myself and ask all of us, do all citizens of the former Soviet Union republics who feel Soviet nostalgia are pro-Russian? This question was not asked by sociological surveys, because I know some Ukrainian Soviet people, they believed in the Soviet Ukraine, they always spoke Ukrainian, but they do not accept the new Ukraine. And they have their own nostalgia. But in any case, we can say that, the amount of Soviet nostalgia in every post-Soviet country correlates with the statistics of people who speak Russian. This is important. The Soviet nostalgia in those who speak Russian, there is correlation. And the structure of population produced by migration policies of the former USSR, we have to take it always into account, because, you know, many people were, like myself, my parents, from the Soviet Far East to Murmansk. So my father was always, he had terrible pro-Soviet nostalgia. So when I was writing my first paper on this, just I was writing about him. Yeah. Some examples. This is, what country is this? Who can guess? Yes, this is Belarus. Yeah, this is Belarus. It looks like Soviet Union. Yeah, and you can see pictures of Lenin and Stalin. This is Georgia. Georgia. Yeah, they have. This is Azerbaijan. Yeah, and the most interesting example. This is Latvia. You know. It's interesting to analyze this empirical data, because in these three cases you have some political motivation, yeah, for this Soviet nostalgia. And in the case of Latvia, okay, sweets were good. So it's about eating, about consuming, you know. It's not politically involved. And my definition of the Soviet nostalgia, I mean, idealized narrative represents the Soviet past as a coherent picture of pleasant and pacifying memories about events, relationships which are lost forever. And the main element is speaking about the USSR as a great epoch. У нас была великая эпоха, as Eduard Limonov once wrote, yeah, and it's a means of reconciling with the loss of the Soviet Empire. But it started like this in the 90s, but it became a means of cultural propaganda. And in the years 2000, Russian cultural industries began producing frightening amounts of Soviet nostalgic products, you know, which at a certain moment were used to channelize the aggressiveness of the disappointed people in order to restore the empire. I want to say that the Soviet nostalgia is not innocent. It's dangerous. And I will try to prove this by giving more examples. And the recipe is simple. Nostalgia plus blood plus war. That's what we have in Donbass. Ukraine. Ukraine has a lot of problems, which makes it vulnerable very sensitive to the Soviet nostalgia. You can see how the country changed during the USSR period. You know, some lands belonged to Poland, to the Czech Republic, to other countries and so on. And Crimea became Ukrainian in 1954. So each territory has its own memory. And in 1991, we got the country like this. And the main idea was to do something about creating a narrative which could unite the country, yeah, and we couldn't do this. This map was made in 2001. You know that we have not conducted a new census. It's one of the most political controversies in our country. We don't know how many Ukrainians live in Ukraine. But according to this map, you can see that this composition is a little bit complicated. Yeah, the green area is more about Ukrainians, most of the Ukrainians. Yeah, the yellow is more or less, but the orange one, and you can see this is the Odessa Oblast in Donetsk. You know, more Russians, and the red one, this is Crimea. Yeah, and you can predict in what areas you will have more people who are nostalgic about the Soviet Union. Distribution of the Ukrainian and Russian languages. I don't believe all the information which you can find on the map, but in general, the picture is more or less accurate. You see, green is Ukrainian, so less green is less Ukrainian, and again you can see the same picture in the same areas, yeah, where the Russian language is dominant. Territorial division and identification with Ukraine, people who identify themselves with Ukraine. We'll again start with the green one, and then you can see the pictures. Now I think it has changed, because after 2014 we have more unified population, pro-Ukrainian, and we can speak about why, but you will see that the indicators of the Soviet nostalgia will show us this is the map of Sovietness. You see, it's interesting. Crimea is less Soviet than Donetsk in this map. That means they were more pro-Russian. They have always been. I was a member of the committee of the dissertation defense in Crimea, in Simferopol, you see. And the last time I was in Simferopol was the 27th of December of 2014, when Ukraine stopped trains. So we were the first to cross the border. You see, I could witness all the mistakes of the Ukrainian government concerning Russian linguistic policies. You know, by the moment when it happened in Ukraine, in Crimea, there were 600 schools, and only 6 schools were Ukrainian. And Crimea is lost. It was the picture which I took in the museum, something like a month after the referendum. It was in Pinchuk Art Center. So, we come to the most disturbing part of my presentation, constructing the old new identity in Donbass, Russian, Ukrainian, Soviet, unknown. But before, I would say another time about Ukraine. Ukraine is has a variety of experiences inside, and a variety of identities inside. So I cannot go into details, but in the western part, for example, we also have, now we know we're having conflicts with Hungary, we have a lot of interesting things with Romania, because it's, they do not associate themselves with the Soviet Union, but we have another dimension, which we define theoreticians of literature as Occidentalism. Yeah, and there are nostalgias like Andruchovich who writes about Austrian-Hungarian nostalgia. Yeah, so this is a very interesting, very productive issue. So, what do we have in Donbass now? And as far as I understand, from what I have read, they are using the Soviet nostalgia is the main element of the new ideology and the new identity they want to create. So it is reflected in some social practices. For example, communist parades. You can see them. And for example, Stalin. Or Союз коммунистов Луганщины. So the pictures are taken in Lugansk, but the pictures are from Radio Svoboda. So we must be very careful about all images we use, because Radio Svoboda is pro-Ukrainian. It presents information from, from the pro-Ukrainian position. But it is like this now. They restore this. So Soviet practices in schools. You can see pioneers, and in my opinion, it's not funny at all. Absolutely, because it's what is written. Без комментариев. Акция Знамя Победы в Луганске продолжается. So Знамя Победы, they ban our victory, and this is also important. One of the most influential components of this Soviet nostalgic discourse is the pro-Soviet interpretation of World War II, of the Great Patriotic War. And we also used, when I was a boy, in 1973, 74, 75, So I saw this. I was one of them. But now they have teachers who do it, and it is restored. Another group of pioneers. It's like, I don't know, déjà vu. Those who were pioneers in the Soviet times, the gymnasium, and people are happy about this. Many people. That's what I don't believe when I watch the anti-Donbass propaganda on Ukrainian television. When they say, okay, it's just performance. People do not believe it. I think there are enough people, too many people who believe in this, who want this. Of course, they were used, they were manipulated, they were used to establish, I don't know what sort of regime we have there. I'm not an expert, but it's definitely connected with the Soviet nostalgia. Many people fought in Donbass not for, I don't know, some mysterious identities. They wanted to come back to the Soviet Union. And again, demonstrations. Again, it was like this many years ago. And this image is very important for me, with this guy in the military uniform with the order of victory on the background, because I want to show you not a very happy video, because very much mass culture with the Soviet nostalgia is being created, is being used now. And it's one of the most terrible mistakes of Ukraine. We're not working with this. I mean, scholars. I had a very difficult discussion with my colleague from Lugansk. She's a refugee, and she works at my university. And she's an extremely smart lady, you know. I admire her. And I ask her, okay, let's try to work with mass culture which is produced there. And she says, do you want to legitimize them? Yeah. So I say it has nothing to do with legitimizing. It's just trying to understand how they persuade people. And I will show you a clip of the rock group which is titled Cuba. So you can see how they use the Soviet nostalgia, yeah, all those components which I mentioned before. So I hear the demonstrations, the war memories, and other things. Of course, they use a lot of, I don't know, this is terrible. But this is what you can find online in Ukraine, in Mykolayiv. I just click and I get it. So, the time of war. The question, have we learned anything? We, Ukrainians. We saw the Soviet nostalgia work. We understand, yeah, that it was used. It is being used. So, and I will show you some results of the sociological surveys which were conducted in 2016, 2017, and 2018. So, dynamics of Soviet nostalgia, September 2016. You know, for those who follow our events, you understand, yeah, the most dramatic period was 2014, especially for Mykolayiv, for example, for us. Not even when Lugansk was taken, but when this fire in Odessa happened. You know, it's a neighboring city, and the city was frightened, you know, just frightened. Everyone was painting fences in blue and yellow, yeah, because it's the spontaneous reaction, yeah. But then time passes, and we are in the situation of the martial law. I am from the area where the martial law was declared, you know. Just you don't understand. What the hell is going on? The war is continuing, but life is peaceful and people forget. You see? About this first shock. And you can see from the age of 18 and older, and factors which were taken into account: gender, region, type of locality in 2,000 interviewees, and the type of surveys, face-to-face interviews, representation arrow, more, it was more, 2.2%, and you see the date, from 16th until the 22nd of September, 2016, and we have 35% regret that the USSR collapsed. Yeah, 50% do not regret it. 15 are uncertain. And we always have the regional variety. In the south, east, and center, at a certain moment we will have east and south. You have to be very attentive about this, you see, because this local identification in Ukraine is something, because when the events in Lugansk and Donetsk began, they say, okay, we are south and east. Mykolayiv said, no, guys, we're south, you are east. So in the southeast and center of the country, 40% of the interviewees regret that the USSR collapsed, and in the west, 18%. You can see the difference. And it's more or less the same all years. So, electoral expectations. Yeah, because it's boring, I think, annoying thing to learn about our political life. I disagree with you that I commented political. I never do anything connected with political life. Educational policies, yes, but political issues, never. I never speak about political parties or whatever and so on. Sometimes I can speak about what is going on in Catalonia, because they cannot find experts. I say, okay, guys, why do you ask me questions? You have been there. This is true. But it's very boring, but we have to take it into account, because we have populist leaders like Tymoshenko, Lashkor, and populist leaders like Poroshenko, and other populist leaders like in the list, all our politicians are populists, you see. And Yuri Boyko, he is the leader of Party of Regions, and now he is one of the candidates to take part in the presidential elections. He has 68% of the Soviet nostalgia. Vadim Rabinovich, he's a friend of Boyko. Now I think they made one party, or one bloc. 52. Nadia Savchenko. You know who Nadia Savchenko is, yeah? So 44%. About 30% supporters of Yulia Tymoshenko and Oleg Lashko. 25 supporters of Petro Poroshenko. It was 2016. I don't have statistics about now. Yeah. Anatoly Gritsenko, Sadovay 9%, Technibok, the leader of Party Svoboda, nationalist right-wing party. And they have followers from the Western Ukraine. All the people with lower level of education and level of incomes are more nostalgic about the USSR. This is general idea which we get every time. Then women are more subject to the Soviet nostalgia than men. And there are reasons for this. Actually, women were better protected in the Soviet times. Unemployed, 42%. Yeah, maybe they just don't remember it. Those who have jobs, 28%. You can see the unemployed are more nostalgic. So those who have good jobs, they never think about it. Those who want the Russian language to be the state language, 58%, or official in some regions like Mykolayiv, 44%. Now all these definitions like state, official, cancelled. We have only one state language everywhere. This is Ukrainian. Another factor was the custom union. It was the idea of Russia to create a kind of union of countries. 61% and more than 70% of those who identify themselves with European Union and NATO do not have Soviet nostalgia. Rating group is a very well-known group which conducts sociological surveys. December 2017, yeah, and they studied correlation of Soviet nostalgia on the regional level with numbers of those who do not support Ukraine's decision to join NATO. Survey conducted on the 12th of December until December 28th. Again, face-to-face interviews, and we have a lot of statistics. You see, at the bottom, Ivano-Frankivsk, and the top is Odessa Oblast, 52%. Yeah, you have been to Odessa Oblast, you know it is huge. Razumkov Center, the 29th of April 2018, against the restoration of the USSR. West 76, Center 67, East 54. So in the age, you can see we have 80% of those who are from 18 to 29. They are nostalgic about the Soviet Union. Yeah, 64 of ethnic Ukrainians are against restoration. Here we have another factor. This is national identification. Ethnic Russians 48. So they are against, and 36% of the ethnic Russians are for the Soviet Union. You see, they change the questions, and they ask, for example, whether the collapse of the USSR an inevitable, a positive event, or other things, and so on. You see the tendency. In 2017, you can see 52% Odessa Oblast, 46% Mykolayiv. I'm moving from the west to the east in the south. 35 Kherson. Kherson is clear, yeah, because the border is there. Then again, 41, 40, 42, 37, you see, but many people, pretty many people. One of the questions is, what is the typical image of the person who has the Soviet nostalgia? One of the ideas is an old babushka, so with very bad education, unemployed or very poor. She supports the idea of the Russian language as second state foreign language. State language, and for the customs and so on. But at the same time, according to the survey of 2016, young people are in the mood for the Soviet nostalgia. 14% in the age of from 18 until 29, 25% in the age from 30 until 39. And we have the explanations, because people are disappointed in what is going on in Ukraine. And more information, other things, you will take a quick look. And I come to some reasons and some conclusions. You can see. In brief, we still have something like 30% of people who have the pre-Soviet nostalgia, and the number is not decreasing. And I think if we keep on making mistakes, it will increase. It can increase, I think so. It's my personal opinion. More things, Razumkov, and so on. Reasons. One of the explanations: we are sad because we are poor. Disappointment in the current economic and social situation in Ukraine. I think you know that our life is not so good. Yeah. A desire to restore golden age. For example, in Mykolayiv, we had a special reason for the Soviet nostalgia. You see, to restore the shipbuilding industry. You can imagine, Mykolayiv was the largest center of shipbuilding industry in Europe. Everything destroyed, disappeared, robbed, stolen, and so on. Metal scrap. The second reason, people look for stability and social comfort, and they think that those two factors are more important than ideology. It's the opinion of Yaroslav Gritsak, a famous Ukrainian historian. They want free medical care, jobs, wages, free education, and so on. 50% feel Soviet nostalgia because they want to be proud of the great state which was respected globally. They still have in Ukraine, not in Russia. And they also want to live in the world without war conflicts. This is doesn't matter where the peace comes from. You know, we need peace. And when the Soviet Union was a superpower, we didn't have wars. They feel nostalgia not about the USSR, but about the time when they were young. It's natural. You see, nostalgia about great father. This is interesting. Ukrainians also have the nostalgia in one of the slides. So we have information which confirms that those people who support Bandera, they admire Peter I. Low political culture, the Ukrainian edition of Homo Sovieticus. You know, people don't understand what the positive meanings are. And I would add influence of Russian cultural industry, which was not controlled until 2014. Now Russian television is prohibited. Practically all films are prohibited, but people can watch them online. And, you know, there are dishes. Yeah, the problem is solved. Conclusion. So the number of people with Soviet nostalgia in Ukraine is still high. In Ukraine, Soviet nostalgia is an important factor of life perception and constructing national identity, which is manipulated by various ideologies. For the nationalist parties and the official pro-president propaganda, it is an element to be deleted from the memories of the citizens. They do it, just prohibit, and so on. For pro-Russian forces, it's a tie which connects Ukraine with Russia. And in the case of Crimea and Donbass, it has become a tool of canalizing aggressive emotions and the local people against post-Maidan Ukraine, and has become the cornerstone of the newly created local pro-Russian identities in the occupied areas. And Ukraine has to pay more attention to the Soviet nostalgia and reorient people to the future and not to the past. Thank you for your attention. Now, we have time for questions, and I was told to give you this microphone because we record. It's not because I do not hear you. I hear you all, but you see, I have another microphone. The red one.
So is there anybody who wants to ask a question, either in Russian or in Ukrainian?
Any alien language, okay.
Окей. Последние годы я касалась вопроса ностальгии, когда я исследовала русско-грузинские литературные связи. Я неудобно стою. Вот так может.
Сидите ко мне.
Да, давайте. И дело в том, что вы нам представили понятие, да, советская ностальгия. Я сталкивалась с понятием постколониальная ностальгия, посткоммунистическая ностальгия, этому посвящены крупные труды. О постсоветской ностальгии, конечно, как бы говорилось, но учитывая, что здесь о советской ностальгии идет речь, у меня возник ряд вопросов в отношении определения. Потому что, основываясь, например, на грузинском материале, вы показали там фотографии, да, дама, которая стоит на фоне машины с фотографиями Сталина. Я хочу сказать, что фигура Сталина, например, в Грузии немножко... Почему я это начала говорить? Советская ностальгия, допустим, по отношению к Грузии, хотя советская ностальгия я немножко не понимаю, да, для меня ближе постсоветская ностальгия. Мне кажется, это более как-то точнее. Вот по отношению к Грузии это очень сложный вопрос, он абсолютно иной, как это выглядит на Украине, учитывая как бы, да, там, я не могу сказать, даже учитывая литературный материал, что там существует вообще, это постсоветская ностальгия. То, что появилась фотография с некой дамой на фоне Сталина, то есть культ Сталина в Грузии практически не существовал. Там больше между собой шушукались о экономических благах, которые пришли как-то больше с Берией. И ностальгии по там, Сталину, или я никогда ни в текстах не встречала, я не слышала о том, чтобы люди гордились: ох, Гагарин полетел в космос, мы тоже как бы, да, присущи. В Грузии как-то это не отмечено. И даже по литературным текстам заметна ностальгия по социальной атмосфере, вот эти застолья, там, приезды гостей и так далее, но не по каким-то политическим пунктам, потому что Грузия иначе существовала, там было 9 марта, да, когда людей расстреливали и бросали в реку, да, 56-й год и так далее, то есть мне кажется, что я уверена, более чем уверена, что в Средней Азии тоже очень сложно говорить, что такое советская ностальгия или постсоветская ностальгия для Средней Азии. Мне кажется, там другие вообще пункты. И Грузия, так же, как и Украина, бедная страна. Но там ностальгии по советскому в том масштабе, который как бы отмечен в России, да, на Украине, ее я не отмечала ни по литературным произведениям, ни по социально-политическим процессам. Мне кажется, потому что, в принципе, это не подогревалось какими-то политическими силами. На Украине есть какая-то заинтересованность политических сил, может быть, с российской стороны, что это раскручивается. Но в Грузии ностальгия, даже основываясь на литературных текстах, ностальгия звучит в русскоязычных диаспорах, как бы ностальгия по атмосфере, но не по каким-то достижениям той эпохи. И вот это к определению...
Могу прокомментировать.
Да, спасибо.
Вообще-то в русскоязычных источниках, да, употребляют термин «ностальгия по-советскому». По-английски я поэтому говорю «nostalgic about the Soviet». The Soviet, я не настаиваю на термин «советский», «постсоветский». Я думаю, что вы поняли, о чем идет речь, и смысл моего выступления, наверное, привлечь внимание. В принципе, то, что вы сказали, не противоречит моим наблюдениям. Я говорю о том, что каждый раз вы должны понимать ситуацию каждой конкретной Советской Республики. Грузия находилась в привилегированном положении в плане культурных политик. Там могло существовать совершенно чудесное грузинское кино, там могла существовать очень развитая культура, и все это было абсолютно бесплатно. Но, в принципе, между прочим, среди тех, кто участвовал в этой истории, существует ностальгия по тем временам. И это все-таки ностальгия с каким-то советским оттенком.
Среди людей, принадлежащих партийной элите в то время.
Не только. Когда слетали художники, когда были люди... У меня была возможность поговорить с некоторыми выдающимися деятелями простите, по Фрейду, все время думаю о своей стране, грузинского кинематографа. Все сложно. Но, в принципе, я с вами согласен. И здесь нужно принимать во внимание еще фактор. Да? То есть Грузия не имеет проблемы с национальным языком. Вообще. Украине приходится просто отбиваться и делать какие-то нечеловеческие движения, чтобы утвердить. До сих пор существует колоссальное сопротивление всем движениям, которые делаются на уровне сознания. Другие миграционные процессы, другая вещь. В каждой Советской Республике это было по-своему. И, конечно, этих оттенков ностальгии, наверное, будет безумное количество. Да? То есть, я же все время только про Украину говорил, которую знаю. Я ведь не Грузию не знаю.
Терминология как-то, вот это вот меня...
Но потом еще, смотрите, все-таки что сделал. Я был в Грузии 2 раза, в 2008-2011 году. Да, то есть все-таки рывок, который сделали в 2000-е годы Саакашвили и его команда, четко совершенно было понятно, да, вот мы строим новую Грузию. Все клипы, которые я тогда смотрел, это все новая Грузия, это другая Грузия, это не та Грузия, она модернизированная, смотрите, какая она, да? Украина, к сожалению, не может показать ничего такого, поэтому народ идет все время назад.
Is there anybody
Well,
else who
you
would like
want
to
to, I
ask a
can
question?
translate it into English. If you're just saying what
I
we
think
should do.
I was thinking about it, but I think it's just useless because we are going to lose half of
Yeah.
the content or more and even more time. If there's nobody else, I would like to ask you a question because the title of your talk was Back to the USSR and the Soviet Nostalgia and Nation Building of the Contemporary Ukraine. Would you agree, well, this is what occurs to me after listening to your interesting talk, that Soviet nostalgia has only negative impacts on Ukrainian nation building, because this is what stuck in my brain, that it is only destructive for some kind of independent Ukrainian nation building process. But is there a way how the Ukrainian side could make use of this discourse, because it is not always as politically instrumental as it is in the Russian case, which is of course obvious. But if you look at other post-socialist countries, they all have some kind of nostalgia for communist times in some form or another, and it is mostly commodified, absolutely commercialized. And perhaps this would be a way to go for the Ukrainian side of the discourse, to employ this heritage in a more innocent, commodified way.
You are an excellent academician. You know, we have an academician in our Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. He asks questions and he answers. Yeah, because I would say, personally, I would say believe, it's not scientific at all. I think that the Soviet nostalgia is negative in the case of Ukraine. But what they do with these, our politicians and people, is even worse. Because they try to delete it. It's not possible to delete anything. And your answer is correct. It's better to do something about it. And the most reasonable thing is to sell it. To convert it into kitsch. To convert it into, I don't know, kind of celebration, you know. Because in Kherson Oblast, we have a huge monument to Tachankas. Yeah? The monuments of the Civil War. Russian Civil War, you know. And I read a project presented for Fulbright Committee, what to do about it. So someone wanted to go to the States to learn more about how to work with things like this. And the idea was clear, to make a thematic park. Disneyland, the Soviet Disneyland, why not? You know, but again, it must be done in a very sophisticated form, you know, not to hurt the feelings of the previous generations. It's not, because sometimes I can provide you an example which my students brought for me to my class about commodification of historical memory, and they compared, it's about something else, but they compared the way of commodification of Diana, Princess in Great Britain. It's like, you know, women's things, they are beautiful, kitschy and so on, but in the Russian case, they brought cakes with the pictures of the emperor's family, which people had to eat. And they were sold at the day of the commemoration day in Yekaterinburg. This is what we should not do in any case, you know. Taste. We need some taste, you know, and some resourcefulness to do something about it. But this is the point. People have to learn. Politicians, they have to read books, to study philology, because it's the only source. Yeah.
I should position myself here. Right? Okay, I just have a couple of points we can reflect on. First of all, you mentioned this particular fusion of Soviet and anti-Soviet elements within the larger discourse of what you call Soviet nostalgia. And maybe you can elaborate on how it works in Ukraine, because as far as I can see, what we've got coming from Russia as a mass cultural production is a kind of nostalgia which is completely purified from all its leftist and Marxist connotations. It's mostly about imperial grandeur. It's more about, well, we had our great epoch, as Eduard Limonov put it on, у нас была великая эпоха. Or we can also talk about his poetry book, USSR is our ancient Rome, СССР наш древний Рим, which is again, first and foremost, an imperial metaphoric in it. And as far as I can tell, there is a huge a paradox or a conflict of this kind of nostalgia and the one which the surveys reflect, which are more about equality, social equality, right? About welfare state, or maybe even a nanny state, well, the state which cherishes you lifelong, which plans your life for, well, decades to come. This is the one, kind of problematic point. Talking about all these pictures in Donbass, you can see it almost live. This conflict, because the Soviet nostalgia there is very religious. It's very much saturated with Orthodox paraphernalia, I would say, like with Orthodox symbols, Святая Русь and so on. Yeah, I would probably leave it on that. And
thank you for the remarks and the questions. I think this particular person, Eduard Limonov, is very important. I have a paper written about it. It was translated into the Polish language, and I took the case of Eduard Limonov to show how he uses nostalgia, the Soviet nostalgia. He's a bastard. We know this, in all senses, because he was anti-Soviet all his life. But at a certain moment, he began consciously to cultivate the Soviet nostalgia, to seduce the younger generations. This is something. Yeah, he knows how to do this. He's a very gifted person. So, and I agree with you that this person is interesting. But speaking about this integration of the imperial meanings into the Ukrainian variant of the Soviet nostalgia, I would say you don't find them. Because this is a specific thing. I mentioned it and I said that it is more about Russia, but not about Ukraine. Because Stalin, we don't have the cult of Stalin. It's not possible in Ukraine. Because the Holodomor discourse is developing. That's it. All Russian imperialist, the traditional, like Suvorov, for example, yeah, we have some local support of Suvorov, in Odessa Oblast, because it's another story, how the traditional imperial Russian imperial mythology is restored in Ukraine. One of the examples. We made a film about José de Rivas, the founder of Odessa, and my friend who made the film, a Spaniard, he says, we are going to show the film. By the way, we cannot show it anymore because in this film appears Álvaro Marichalar, who visited Donbass 2 weeks ago. The film cannot be shown in Ukraine. I'm sorry. You see, when we made it, it was 2010, and we didn't have this problem. But this creator of the film, the Spaniard, he says, okay, the Rivas founded Odessa. And my friend from Lviv says, no, he did not found Odessa. He refounded Odessa because in Odessa, on the place where Odessa was, there was a fortress, Hagi Bey. So now we restore the Turkish traces, in our areas. And it happens in all other segments. It's not possible to speak about the White Guard, because Denikin was anti-Ukrainian, it's clear, and so on. And that means in the Ukrainian variant, the Soviet nostalgia is more, I would say, vague. It's something does not have this imperial references. It is Soviet maybe, and it is about the Soviet Union of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They cut very often. They cut the history of World War II. Because it is connected with cultural policies of the Ukrainian government. Because, for example, we celebrate 2 days of victory: the 8th of May, and it's the day of memory, and the 9th of May, it's the traditional, but in this case, you see, the attention, the impact is dispersed. I think it's a good decision. They did not cancel the holiday, they introduced another one. Okay, you want to do, the church issue is extremely controversial, especially after the war, because one of the main arguments against the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, they didn't want to to serve over the dead people. Ukrainian soldiers who were killed in the war in Donbass, they were brought to the Russian Church of the Moscow Patriarch, and the clergyman said, "No, get out of here." This is the most popular image which is used now at this particular moment, and this is, I just retell what I see, and in this case, again, you see this combination of the Russian Orthodox. It's interesting. It's a very interesting question, because it helps us understand the peculiarities of every post-Soviet country. Actually, I'm very thankful to your questions, because we go to a broader context, and we can see, we can compare the countries which had the same past, but now they are experiencing different things. Yeah? Okay, more questions?
Are there more questions? Yes, just a second. Do you want to come to the front, or do you want me to give you the mic? Yeah, just come over.
Hello. In my opinion, the nostalgia of communist area, it seems for me like the Islamist wave in Turkey, for example. Turkey has no communist past, but there is another source of nostalgia. My question is, what is the source of this nostalgia in countries that are not the central capitalist countries, like Turkey, Russia? They are in periphery, but in the people there are always a nostalgia. In Turkey there's a Islamist nostalgia now, in Russia there's a communist nostalgia now, but is this economic system now able to give satisfying the people in Russia or in Turkey? What is the impact of this economic system now in this nostalgia?
If we speak about Ukraine,
yes,
you see, because we literary scholars, so one of the stereotypes that Turkey is the country of nostalgia, because you have a wonderful writer whose name is Orhan Pamuk. And so he wrote the book Istanbul, the City of Memories, extremely nostalgic, extremely wonderful. The book is extremely popular. I know that Orhan Pamuk has a negative reception in his country, positive reception in the country, but I refer to this example. Actually, we should take into the account these the peculiarities of nostalgic country in general. You see, because when I say that Spain is a nostalgic country, just a nostalgic country, they have nostalgia everywhere, and they know how to keep it, you know, so that in some special place, not to destroy. But if we speak about Ukraine, I think the most important factor for this influence of this Soviet nostalgia is bad economic situation. When people start getting better salaries, they will forget about the Soviet Union forever. This is my personal belief.
Perhaps you can both ask a question and then Oleksandr can answer them together, okay? Because we have only 4 minutes.
По-русски задам вопрос. Я как раз хотел бы задать вопрос в связи вот с вашим последним тезисом относительно того, что это плохая экономическая ситуация является функцией или является источником ностальгии. Если мы в более широком контексте рассмотрим этот феномен ностальгии по прошлому, то я бы сказал, что мы можем найти довольно-таки похожие явления практически во всех. В Германии, это Восточная Германия, даже вот сейчас в Соединенных Штатах ностальгия по золотым 50-м, да, то есть в любом случае существует некий феномен компенсации, желание компенсировать некую динамику исторического развития, динамику изменений и скорости этих изменений. И когда население реагирует на эту динамику компенсаторно, то есть пытаясь каким-то образом возродить или ментально вернуться к прежнему времени, когда этой динамики не было. То есть в данном случае можно сказать, что скорее скорость изменения в социальных изменений порождает такого рода ностальгию. И, соответственно, здесь мы не можем говорить о каком-то специфическом случае Украины. Или вы же видите все-таки здесь какую-то особую специфику?
Ну, я совершенно с вами согласен, что экономические вот эти вещи имеют значение. Я бы сказал, что для меня важна, ну, скажем так, приоритетность этих причин. И я говорю о сегодняшнем моменте, о внутреннем состоянии на сегодня. Потому что, вы понимаете, продолжается бесконечная война, постоянно убивают людей. Каждый день. Ситуация экономическая, ну, никак не улучшается, вообще никакой динамики нет. И вот за последние 2 года, например, это действительно создает... Ну, у нас правительство, глупость его состоит в том, что оно не работает с эмоциями населения. Вообще. Плевать им на это все, да? И вот они, вот это вот происходит, вот сейчас, потому что, ну вот я говорю так, может быть оно через какое-то время, когда люди поймут, зачем им нужно терпеть, они, может, и перестанут ностальгировать, но они не понимают сейчас. Вот это вот состояние, оно накладывается, и это превращается в какой-то такой фактор важный, такой в общественном сознании. Они думают, что это главное. Вот об этом я хотел сказать. Потому что в других случаях, конечно, бывают экономические трудности или что-то еще, но если вы понимаете, зачем это делается, люди могут или не понимают, они верят, что не понимают, они не переживают так эти вещи. А в Украине не падает. Вот что меня при всей ужасной ситуации, военной и прочей, этот процент не падает. Вот это интересно. Почему? Потому что тяжело живется. Ну, это мое персональное мнение.
You don't like to speak about political issues, but I mean this link to the Soviet past has really clear political reason. So I mean, especially we speak about the war in Donbass, in the Donbass region. For the mobilization of population, it's necessary to provide to support revitalization of national, heroic narrative. And in case in Ukraine, and I don't speak about LNR or DNR, it's about in Ukraine we have a huge process of discovering, or I mean established process of forgetting heroes. You already mentioned Bandera or Shukhevich, but in DNR, LNR they have only this option, the Soviet heroic past. So maybe we have to speak not about in general population in Donbass, but about certain actors in this region.
Yeah, of course.
And so you mentioned this trying from the side of Ukrainian government to delete this Soviet nostalgia. What do you mean? Could you describe shortly what do you mean about this deleting process?
The process of deleting.
Yeah.
For example, just changing calendars. We stop celebrating many dates. Just that's it. This is the decision. We don't do this anymore, and people in general accept it. It does not provoke any
They celebrated it.
or somewhere, not officially. You see, that's the
No,
point.
I mean celebrated this deleting. I mean the population in Ukraine supports actually this.
Some yes, some not. For example, the 23rd of February. We have another day. This is the 14th of October, the day of Ukrainian army. And it's becoming more and more popular. But it is becoming more and more popular. And this maybe it is a good decision not to celebrate the 23rd, and they explain that nothing happened on this day and it was purely political decision and so on. But in many cases, I will think about it. Just maybe very quick. But deleting from the memory. They could not delete anything. Any attempt which they try to delete, they cannot do it. Because the population restores. For example, decommunization, change the names of streets. Good idea. If you take Mykolayiv, they changed, the idea was, okay, we renamed the streets as they were named before the revolution. If the street existed before the revolution, it is given the name before the revolution. No problem. But not all streets were given those names. Some names so worked for another reason. Or they gave back the name like Soborная, the main street. But there is no cathedral. And people still call it Sovetskaya. Double consciousness. Something. When they try to delete it, people restore it. When they find some tricks, it works, but I don't see the system in this. You see, there is no system in this madness. They have to be more. I think we have to finish, yes? Or not?
Or less, but first, Oleksandr, let me first thank you for this very much inspiring discussion and the talk that
Thank you for.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for for giving me a chance to think about the issues which are not only important from the academic viewpoint. Today, I don't take it as an academic presentation. It was just a talk about the phenomenon which is extremely important to all of us who come from not only from this post-Soviet world, but just who come from this world. Thank you very much.